9 minutes ago, a large-scale failure occurred. An explosion at the White House, Trump's peace plan has collapsed, the US has fallen flat on its face, and Russia is writhing in its death throes. Turkey acted preemptively. The sea has become a trap for the Kremlin. The shadow fleet is on the brink. China has pushed Putin to the edge of the abyss. Europe is raising its armies, and finally, the West has understood. Thank you. All this in our episode, Hell Point. Urgently, Trump's peace plan is falling apart at the seams. The US and Russia can't find common ground, and the positions of both sides are only becoming more entrenched. Putin is once again trying to take everything for himself, while the head of the White House seems to have lost focus. A storm has hit Washington. Kyiv is seizing the moment and turning the course of events to its advantage. Will the plan hold, and will Trump be able to save face before the world? Or is this the end of yet another illusion? We'll tell you in just a moment.
In the corruption scandal that erupted in Ukraine, known as Mindage-gate, US Vice President J.D. Vance saw a window of opportunity. This was reported by The Atlantic. Supposedly, Vance decided that the Ukrainian authorities found themselves in an extremely weak position and would therefore instantly agree to the 28 points which, as has now been confirmed, were written in Moscow. But then there's New York. The Times reports that the new special envoy, Dendry Skal, who also appeared at Vance's suggestion, was promoting the so-called peace plan among European diplomats, warning them about the might of the Russians, which was ready to come crashing down not only on the Ukrainians.
He said, look, if before Russia was making missiles on the fly and immediately firing them at Ukraine, now Russia has a stockpile. This is clearly a Russian narrative. It's obviously a story that, well, definitely doesn't come from Ukraine. It's a story that was made up. The Russians have armed negotiators close to Venza and from Kov with this narrative.
Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Ministry stated that they do not see Europe at the negotiating table for peace in Ukraine. And Putin, in his usual manner, explained when he would be ready to end the hostilities.
Ukrainian troops will withdraw from the territories they currently occupy. Only then will the fighting stop. If they don't withdraw, we will achieve this by military means.
The Americans failed to put a peace plan on Trump's desk by Thanksgiving. However, according to media reports, they have not abandoned the idea. And supposedly, they promised to consider security guarantees for Ukrainians only after President Zelensky puts his signature on the document.
First of all, this is unacceptable for us because after 4 years of full-scale invasion, we understand that even with security guarantees, starting from the Budapest Memorandum era, none of the parties that pledged to uphold them in the event of an attack on Ukraine actually honored those commitments. At this point, talking about signing an agreement before there are any guarantees that in half a year, or even 5 years, we won't find ourselves in an even more difficult war is definitely not a convincing argument for Ukrainian society. But it seems to me that if this insight proves true, the Americans would prefer to push both sides, but somehow it turns out that Ukraine is much more actively pushed.
Meanwhile, after the scandal with the intercepted phone conversation between Witkov, Dmitriev and Ushakov, the White House is pretending as if nothing happened. Donald Trump has taken up pardoning a Turkey.
Are you ready for this? I just want to say that it's very important that you are here relaxing in such an unusual way. Good. That's nice. I don't want to disturb this wonderful spot. Very good. Very good. Thank you all very, very much. That was a truly fantastic job. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you all very, very much.
Some senators, on Donald's behalf, are demanding the resignation of Witkov, who is actually suspected of working for Moscow. Some analysts believe that the leak of phone conversations is actually a demonstration of the struggle between two sides for a place closer to Trump. On one side is Vice President Vance, on the other is Secretary of State Rubio. The latter, by the way, did not react in any way to the information about Witkov's conversations, but only to journalists' reports that things are not so smooth and unified within the Republican ranks. But analysts believe that it is unlikely Trump will actually punish Witkov.
It's highly improbable, almost beyond belief. They are fundamentally cut from precisely the same cloth, sharing many identical characteristics. They communicate with each other in a unique and specialized language that only they truly understand. Furthermore, they do not possess even a single drop of genuine ideology between them, making their motivations purely pragmatic. You can't spot any ideas among them at all. They both couldn't care less whether it's Republicans or Democrats. The only thing that matters is self-interest. I think, as one of my interlocutors mentioned, he said that when Vitkov came and told Donald Trump that we have a chance to get $150 billion from Russian money for, according to some fund, I think Trump said, go ahead, that's great, $150 billion isn't something you just find lying around. This, it truly seems to me, is the absolutely main and most crucial point here. Donald Trump consistently behaves like a shrewd and calculating businessman, rather than conducting himself as a respected statesman or a skilled diplomat, which is a significant distinction. He has his own interests, and he strictly follows those interests.
Very soon, American politicians will enter the race for voters' favor. The Senate elections are scheduled for November of next year. Currently, the Republicans have a 3-seat advantage in this government body. Just recently, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who until not long ago was an ardent fan of Donald Trump, resigned, and Don Bacon has told journalists he intends to follow her example. And this means that Donald's party risks losing its majority even before the midterm elections.
Immediately, Erdogan sharply pulls the rug out from under the Kremlin. Russian offices are being dangerously enticed. The Black Sea route for the Russians has suddenly narrowed. The sea is now not a gateway but a trap. Putin didn't even have time to recover. Turkey's decision was a cold shower. Erdogan is showing a toughness that Moscow definitely did not expect. Will the Kremlin be able to recover from such a blow? And why could this move by Turkey change the balance of power in the region? More on this ahead. The end of relations between Turkey and Russia. Ankara has reaffirmed its support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and its readiness to help rebuild the country after the war. Turkish President Recep Erdogan announced this during a joint briefing with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. We have once again reaffirmed our commitment to the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of our strategic partner, Ukraine. Turkey is always ready to discuss with Russia any proposals that would accelerate a ceasefire and pave the way for a just and lasting peace. In response, Volodymyr Zelensky emphasizes that Turkey has become a key partner not only in matters of security, but also in the restoration of prisoner exchange processes. This is a process that Ukraine hopes to restart by the end of the year.
Right now, many processes have become more active. We are trying to ensure that all this activity is directed specifically toward peace, for a just peace and guaranteed security.
If you look at Turkish policy, it has always been aimed at its own interests, both in relation to Ukraine and in relation to Russia. That is, Turkey does not refuse to trade with the Russian Federation. They do everything that serves their own interests. Of course, right now we are falling into Turkey's sphere of interests. They support us. To a certain extent, they support us. Turkey's policy very clearly reflects this 1,000-year-old Eastern approach, very deliberate, very competent, where above all, in any situation, their own interests come first, especially economic interests.
However, a certain tension in the relations between Russia and Turkey is still not being felt. Russian tourists found themselves stranded on board the Astoria Grande cruise liner off the coast of Turkey. In Istanbul, the ship was not granted permission to enter the port. There were more than 600 people on board, residents of the Krasnodar region, Moscow, and the Leningrad region, who had purchased a 2-week cruise costing about $3,000. The liner was supposed to call at Marmaris, Antalya, Bodrum, and Izmir. Earlier, a similar situation occurred with the ferry Sibrich, which was supposed to resume cargo and passenger service between Trabzon and Sochi after a 14-year hiatus. Upon arriving in Sochi, the vessel was unable to dock and return to Turkey. The Russian authorities explained the refusal by citing the alleged technical unpreparedness of the ports and the inability to ensure the safe reception of vessels. The media are already reporting on Turkey's responses to the actions of the Russian authorities. The imposition of transport restrictions is becoming a tool of pressure and an indicator of Turkey's shift towards supporting Ukraine and limiting Russia's capabilities in the Black Sea.
Turkey is also an incredibly important and strategic logistics hub for Russia. We must not forget that both the crucial oil pipelines and the essential gas pipelines passing through Turkey primarily supply vital gas and oil resources from Russia, playing a significant role in their energy distribution. Turkey is a truly significant hub not only for Ukraine, but also an incredibly important and indeed the sole crucial hub for Russia, playing an essential and pivotal role.
Meanwhile, Erdogan held a phone conversation with the Russian dictator. According to the Kremlin, the parties discussed bilateral relations, the war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as regional and global issues. Putin allegedly confirmed the Russian side's interest in resolving the conflict through political and diplomatic means. An exchange of views was held regarding the situation around Ukraine, including in the context of American proposals for a peaceful settlement. Vladimir Putin noted that these proposals, in the version we have reviewed, are in line with the discussions held at the Russian-American summit in Alaska and, in principle, could serve as the basis for a final peaceful settlement, according to the Kremlin. President Erdogan, for his part, declared Turkey's readiness to continue efforts aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace, and to participate in any diplomatic initiatives that will facilitate direct dialogue between the parties. Turkey is ready, as before, to contribute to all diplomatic initiatives and plans that will promote direct contacts between the parties and pave the way for lasting peace in our region. Although Ankara seeks to maintain its role as a mediator in Russian-Ukrainian relations, its recent actions demonstrate an increasingly clear orientation toward international law and support for Ukrainian sovereignty. An unexpected turn of events. China is taking away Russia's last levers of influence, and Putin has found himself on his knees before Beijing. Xi Jinping is squeezing the last bit of influence out of the Russian Federation. Trump nods approvingly, while in the Kremlin they hope this nightmare will soon be over. Moscow's circle of friends is rapidly shrinking. Will China really dare to say goodbye to Russia completely and rid itself of Kremlin influence? We'll talk about this in just a moment.
China is abandoning Russia. Yes, you heard that right. Beijing skillfully pretends to be a partner, but in reality it uses Moscow as a weak spot. And
In our country, there's a saying that has become a catchphrase. Russians and Chinese are brothers forever. But
here's what's interesting. Recently, Xi spoke on the phone with Trump and stated that he supports the US's peace efforts to resolve the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. It sounds nice in words, but in reality,
what exactly is truly happening here right now? As for what's happening on the peace settlement track in terms of the tools for peacefully resolving the Russian-Ukrainian war, the absolutely main and crucial point of this very important message should be the following. Russia must not, under any circumstances, win this devastating war, and Ukraine, consequently and most assuredly, must not by any means lose.
and one more thing. The leaders of the countries have agreed on visits. Trump is already planning to go to China in April.
It'll be intense. For Trump to sign the desired trade agreement with China, specifically in April, for example, during a potential meeting in Beijing, that's a big question. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing deeper here, especially regarding the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war within these time frames. April 2026, a meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump in Beijing.
So what is China doing wrong in relation to Russia? It would seem everything is fine.
But
It's all because China is making very good money off Russia. The prices of export goods supplied to the country have increased on average by 87%.
Relations between Russia and China have always been very untrustworthy. And if we think they're friends, they're not. There's a good word for this. They're fellow travelers. Russia and China are fellow travelers. It's beneficial for China. A weak Russia, a weak Putin is beneficial for China. It's advantageous for China to buy raw materials cheaply. It's advantageous for China to then sell goods to the Russian Federation at a very high price. Russia has no other way out, essentially.
But it's not just about goods. China is gradually entering Russian regions, gaining access to territories and resources.
you know, there are already examples in the Far East where a small settlement has become predominantly Chinese, and now they even participate in municipal elections there.
And Russia, in turn, is becoming increasingly dependent on China. And
doesn't this kind of relationship suit Putin? Again, of course not. Of course it doesn't suit him. Well, because Putin has phantom pains from the USSR, basically, throughout his entire presidency, he has tried to restore some kind of former greatness, let's call it gathering Russian lands. But in reality, he is simply leading the Russian Federation to collapse, to a complete, absolute collapse, to financial bankruptcy.
Beijing is increasingly strengthening its influence in Central Asia while pushing Moscow into the background. This probably can't help but worry the old man in the Kremlin.
It is necessary to steadfastly strengthen the friendship between China and Kazakhstan, make joint efforts to promote comprehensive cooperation, and make a greater contribution to peace in the region and around the world, as well as to development, stability, and the positive energy of Chinese-Kazakh relations.
But here is the main question. What really drives China? A true partnership with Russia?
According to this, the communication reflects the strategic nature of Russian-Chinese relations, which are at an unprecedentedly high level.
Or is Beijing simply taking advantage of the situation and acting in its own interests?
They are absolutely not interested in Russia truly winning this protracted war, because if Vladimir Putin ultimately wins this significant war, then he effectively restores his geopolitical agency and considerable influence. He then starts talking to all the major global players, for example, to the United States of America and the People's Republic of China on a completely equal footing, which is absolutely and fundamentally not in line with China's crucial strategic interests. Yes, this position is hidden.
China talks about friendship, but only acts when it benefits them. He profits from Russia, strengthens his influence, and at the same time builds relations with the US. And Moscow is becoming increasingly dependent on Beijing's decisions.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Europe is on edge, Russia is escalating further. The Kremlin has prepared something on a larger scale. The EU is in its sights. The response was not long in coming. A new military Schengen regime is being launched on the continent. Troops and equipment move without obstacles. Production at defense factories is accelerating to the limit. Will Europe manage to break the Kremlin scenario and put Moscow in its place? All the most important details about this are in the following report.
The danger from the Kremlin is getting closer. The European Union is preparing to confront Putin. NATO is concentrating weapons and manpower near the borders with Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. At the same time, members of the European Parliament are working seriously on a military Schengen.
We must show Putin that Europe is no longer associated with powerlessness and democracy is not equated with weakness.
The Schengen is being prepared in close cooperation with the North Atlantic Alliance. Brussels is taking decisive steps. Among them is a plan to modernize the defense industrial complex. The European Commission has announced the timeline and presented a new package of measures for military mobility. This will enable the European army to move quickly across EU territory without facing excessive bureaucracy, especially in the event of a possible threat from Russia. In
the defense industry, we will be strong if we are industrially independent, autonomous, and less fragmented.
Ukraine is acting as an ally. The country will have access to defense logistics. We
want to expand military mobility corridors in Ukraine. This would serve as a security guarantee, meaning we could provide faster support if needed.
First and foremost, it is necessary to modernize the infrastructure, digitize the procedures, and increase funding. One of the key challenges for EU countries remains ensuring the rapid transportation of troops to potential combat zones.
We can respond to these threats either symmetrically or asymmetrically. We have the full arsenal of tools at our disposal.
At present, the threat to the Baltic states remains. And in the event of a sudden escalation, for example, the French army would need to cover about 1,500 kilometers to come to the aid of its allies. Despite the fact that light units are able to move relatively quickly, heavy equipment requires significantly more time and preparation.
Currently, European bridges, roads and railways are not adapted for the rapid movement of tanks, soldiers, and military cargo. If transported from the west to the eastern flank, tanks can get stuck in tunnels, in complicated bureaucracy, and bridges cannot withstand the passage of these vehicles.
With the experience of the Russian Federation's war against Ukraine, the European Union has paid significant attention to modernizing critically important infrastructure. Transport routes will be upgraded to dual-use standards so that they can simultaneously serve both civilian and military needs. The role of the military Schengen is especially important in strengthening the defense of the eastern flank, primarily for the Baltic countries and Poland.
Everything depends on our position. Will we be able to deter the enemy, or will we encourage them to aggression?
But not everyone sees the danger coming from Russia, or they simply try to close their eyes to reality, maintaining close ties with the Kremlin dictator Putin.
We're talking about an armament program that will require us to spend everything down to the last thread. And this concerns all of Europe. It's quite clear from the statements of several influential leaders. They want to start a war.
Germany is doing everything it can to help Ukraine equip the armed forces with long-range missile systems, as well as organizing joint production on our territory.
For several months now, we have been working intensively with the Ukrainian government on implementing long-range weapons projects. The Ukrainian army is being equipped with such systems. We have agreed not to discuss the details publicly, as we believe the Russian side should not be informed about the extent of our military support. I can only say that we are doing everything possible to equip the Ukrainian army with weapon systems that have the necessary range, and the number of such systems will increase over the coming weeks and months, and if necessary, even up to producing such weapons in Ukraine.
The European Union's military budget is planned to be increased to more than 17 billion euros. In total, at least 100 billion euros are needed to modernize bridges and tunnels and to fully launch 4 corridors for military needs. Putin's words cannot be trusted based on Ukraine's experience.
There's no need to make things up and then base opinions about Russia on these inventions. There's no need to create an image of Russia as the enemy. We supposedly made up that Russia wants to attack NATO. Are you completely out of your mind or what? As dumb as this table. Who came up with this? This is nonsense, you understand. Utter rubbish.
While the dictator openly lies to journalists, members of the European Parliament are calling for regular joint exercises and stress tests. They want the European Union to follow NATO's example so that rapid response forces can react quickly to military threats. To Kremlin aggression.
Russia is in deep trouble. The old tankers built to circumvent Western sanctions and export oil have already exhausted their service life. Now they're heading straight for the scrapyard. The Kremlin is losing its last levers for smuggling, and the tanker survival empire is starting to fall apart. It seems that now Putin really won't be able to slip away. All the details about this, don't miss it. Coming up next.
Putin is billions in the red.
I seriously doubt that I can add anything truly new or significant here.
Russia's shadow fleet has entered a phase of mass decommissioning. Aging tankers are being forced to sell at a discount and for less money. More and more old Russian tankers are reaching the end of their service life and need to be scrapped. As a result, the floating scrap metal is turning into something specialized, which undermines the capabilities of the shadow fleet, forcing them to sell sanctioned vessels at a discount and look for ways to compensate.
Secondary sanctions against the end consumers of Russian energy resources. This is a very serious blow to the Russian economy.
The average age of the shadow fleet vessels is 20 years, with 60% of the ships being that age or older.
At the moment, the Russian side is forced to admit that the expenditure side of the Russian budget has increased by almost 3.5%. A percentage of GDP, and this is evidence that there is practically no money left in the treasury of the Russian Federation, and accordingly, the ability to replenish funds through the operations of the shadow fleet is reduced to a minimum.
This month, dismantling began in a Turkish port of the tanker Eagle S, which became known after an emergency in the Gulf of Finland. A year ago, the vessel damaged several underwater cables with its anchor, and the Finnish authorities discovered something suspicious on board.
This encompasses a wide array of tools, machinery, apparatus, and instruments, all designed for specific functions. It refers to the necessary items, gear, or provisions required for a particular purpose, whether for industrial operations, commercial ventures, or personal use, ensuring tasks can be performed effectively and efficiently. Possible sanctions from American partners, and the subsequent further actions of the Russian Federation, specifically lowering the global market price of crude oil, clearly indicate that they are essentially being compelled and forced to significantly dump prices in a desperate attempt to retain at least some substantial number of their traditional consumers of Russian energy resources and vital commodities.
Many vessels in the shadow fleet have already exceeded their service life. Therefore, these rusty tubs won't last long before they have to be decommissioned. In 2024, 409 ships were officially scrapped.
the number of decommissioned vessels will continue to increase. This significant pressure is also being increasingly applied to other countries that furnish their flags to Russian vessels, such as flags of convenience. It should be noted that EU countries have introduced additional sanctions against, accordingly, the shadow fleet of the Russian Federation, minimizing the possibility of using this loophole to replenish the Russian budget.
Russian tax revenues from oil sales are at their lowest since the beginning of the war. Sanctions are hitting Russia hard, and there will be even more of them.
The losses from US sanctions at this point have already in October, sanctions against 65
vessels were additionally imposed by New Zealand. And recently, Canada also expanded its own restrictions. Another 100 vessels from the Russian shadow fleet were added to the list.
That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hatsakalo. Even more scorching news in our next episode. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.